At the beginning, the scene showed a house, then a hallway, followed by the face of a girl crying. A boy stood there with a stick in hand, while the girl, dressed in a maid outfit, was sitting on the floor with her hands tied behind her back. The boy, with his tongue out and eyes wide open, noticed her tied hands. He appeared surprised and wondered who she was and where this place could be. With shock, he questioned what was happening. The girl looked confused, while the boy thought that just a moment ago he had been playing a game. Before he realized it, a woman was now tied up in a lewd position right in front of him. He stared at her with a tense expression, and the girl, blushing, addressed him as Weiss Sama. The boy, now angry and tense, thought to himself that she was incredibly beautiful but felt like he had seen her before. He also wondered why she called him Weiss. Then, looking into a mirror at the side, he saw his reflection and realized with shock that he had become the villainous and abusive noble, Weiss Vincent. He understood there was no mistake. This was the villainous character from the school game Noblesse Oblige. It was a school fantasy game he had cleared multiple times. Weiss Vincent was the villainous noble who stood in the way of the protagonist Alan during the school arc. Weiss was the lowest kind of scum, a man who relentlessly tormented the weak with his power. After being thoroughly defeated by the protagonist, Weiss lost everything, became a servant of the Demon King, and was ultimately used as a shield before dying. The boy then looked at the girl again and realized that the tied-up maid was Lilith Scarlet. He remembered that Weiss had a hobby of tormenting Lilith. Feeling guilty, he thought about what a horrible bastard Weiss must have been to do such things to such a cute girl. He decided to quickly untie her, but hesitated, worrying that suddenly changing his stance might seem suspicious. Lilith appeared confused, while the boy nervously claimed he would stop there for today. He untied the rope and then noticed a mark on Lilith's neck. Seeing her trembling, he pitied her and wondered if he should give healing a try. He raised both hands, invoked healing magic, and successfully healed the mark. Lilith was shocked, while he was surprised to realize he had just used healing magic. This was the hidden healing ability that the developers had included since the beginning of the game, which he had only known about from a strategy book. Lilith continued to stare at him. Feeling flustered, he told himself that it was just practice and not for her sake. Lilith's expression darkened, and then she suddenly cried with gratitude, thanking Weiss Sama sincerely. She was surprised and overjoyed, saying she did not know Weiss could use healing magic. He remained silent but thought about how, even though it was originally Weiss's fault, Lilith was now thanking him. He realized Weiss had tormented her so much that she had become obedient to this extent. With a darkened expression, he apologized to Lilith for everything that had happened until now and promised not to do it again. Lilith looked puzzled at his words. The scene shifted to the dining room of the house, where a person was serving Weiss food. This was Zevis Alden, the butler of the Vincent family. Zevis thought about how Weiss would normally complain that the food tasted bad and throw the plate on the floor. Weiss instead addressed Zevis directly. With a tense face, Zevis answered. Weiss admitted that he had been wrong until now, treating food carelessly, and said that the seasoning was perfect today. Zevis looked at him with surprise and with tears of joy shouted that such gracious words were an honor. Lilith, standing behind, also tearfully praised Weiss Sama, saying he was wonderful. Weiss thought to himself that it was just a meal, but these people were so moved that they did not even notice that a completely different person was now inside Weiss's body. He realized that Weiss must have been truly terrible before. He resolved not to make Lilith or the other poor girls sad anymore. Later, Weiss opened a closet and decided to dispose of the stick he had used earlier. Carrying it into the backyard, he vowed that he must change even more. He remembered that the entrance exam for the academy was just 2 years away. As a noble, he was obligated to attend a good academy at the age of 15. Weiss's reputation would soon begin to decline, and negative opinions would rise. After losing to the protagonist in the combat test, everything had spiraled downward. Weiss resolved that he had no choice but to change the future. He dropped the stick, thinking that perhaps the future might have already shifted. Throwing a matchstick on the woodpile, he walked away, determined to avoid the path of ruin, even if it took all his strength. Later, Weiss was shown sweating heavily while sitting under a cut tree when someone suddenly called out his name. Shocked, he saw a girl in armor. This was Milka Vitas, an S-rank adventurer. She asked if Weiss was even taking his training seriously. Struggling to stand, Weiss admitted he could barely move and asked for a break. Milk told him to rest only if he wanted to be called a loser right after enrolling. With a dark expression, Weiss avoided her gaze and continued swinging his sword. He thought about how he had used his family's connections to ask for an amazing person to become his teacher. Mangacapped originally appeared at the end of the game and was considered the strongest swordsman in the royal capital. Weiss had told her to forget he was a noble and train him without mercy. However, she turned out to be extremely sadistic and frightening. From behind, Lilith appeared and called out to Weiss-sama, handing him a piece of cloth. Weiss thanked Lilith and tied it around his forehead. Lilith asked what the writing on it meant, and Weiss explained that it meant he would do his best to the point of dying. Weiss thought about how Noblesse Oblige was a death game, a super high difficulty game that could only be cleared through repeated attempts. While swinging his sword, he reminded himself that neglecting preparation would result in immediate expulsion or even death. He acknowledged that he had never trained his body properly, even in his past life, and that the process was exhausting. Weiss understood that improving physical fitness was crucial for swordsmanship and magic. He began each day by practicing forms, then ran endlessly to improve stamina, and finished with intense muscle training, repeating the process from morning until night. After 2 weeks, Weiss was still pushing himself. Injuries could be healed with magic, but diet was also important. Zevis provided meals packed with protein to support his training. Weiss felt grateful, acknowledging Zevis's support even while he was overwhelmed. By 3 weeks, the training felt so hellish that each day seemed like a month. Once Weiss had finally adjusted to physical training, he decided to call for a magic teacher. Weiss, tired of Milk Sensei's strictness, hoped for a kinder teacher. When Zevis brought someone in, a figure entered wearing a hat, introduced herself as Weiss's teacher, and then threw her cap aside. It was none other than Mangacapped. Weiss fell to his knees in frustration, realizing she was also a master of magic. Zevis explained that Milk was a genius magic swordsman who could use 2 of the 4 great magic attributes. Weiss begged for kindness, and Milk smiled, promising to be gentle. However, training became harsher than ever. She made Weiss stand under a waterfall to channel magic power, ordering him to repeat it until he passed out. Weiss cried in frustration, realizing this was even tougher than sword training. Lilith later ran in, panicked, after finding him floating in the water. From that day on, Weiss added practical sword training with Milk to his basic magic regimen. He endured painful strikes, collapsing often, only to be healed by Lilith. Weiss found relief in her support, but Milk considered him a good punching bag and continued relentlessly. Despite everything, Weiss began to question why someone as lazy as he had been in his past life was able to work so hard now. Back then, he had been like a living corpse, always running away, surrendering, and giving up. Yet now he could work diligently. He wondered what the difference was. After 2 months, Weiss's training showed results. One day, Milk praised him for achieving his goal in 2 hours. She gently patted his head, saying this was his reward. Weiss felt the ratio of carrot to stick was off, but Milk insisted otherwise. She explained that Weiss had already received plenty of kindness from others, and that her role was to provide the strict discipline he needed. Lilith then appeared, smiling as she brought Weiss his lunch. Milk told Weiss not to forget the existence of the carrot roll, those who supported him so that he could keep going. Weiss realized that the reason he could do his best was thanks to everyone around him: Lilith, who always supported him, Zevis, who provided meals, and Milk Sensei, who hardened her heart for his growth. While eating, Weiss reflected on his past life and the former Weiss. Neither had supporters nor people who scolded them. What he truly needed was a mix of both love and harshness. He resolved that he would no longer live just for himself. He did not want to die or be ruined. From now on, he would avoid the path of destruction, not only for himself, but also for Lilith, Zevis, and Milk. The next morning, Weiss looked exhausted under the waterfall, as Milk shouted that his next goal was 4 hours, commanding him to keep going until death. Weiss thought that it was still unbearably tough, even now. Lilith once again rushed to him as he floated on the water, while Weiss silently endured his grueling path forward. The scene shifted to a town where Milk, Weiss, and Lilith were walking along the road. Weiss thought that this was the League Belt town, the first town the protagonist arrived at in the game. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting about cheating during a fight, and Weiss thought that the security was still as bad as ever. With a side glance at Milk, Weiss asked who his opponent was. He reflected that it had been 3 months since he had started training, and since it seemed about the right time, he had been assigned to conduct a practical test in this city. He wondered if the actual combat would involve picking a fight with some random thug. Weiss noticed Milk smiling with a psychotic expression, and she reassured him to look forward to the opponent she was planning to pick for him. Weiss began sweating heavily. From behind, Lilith encouraged Weiss to fight with a smile, and Weiss, still tense, thought that he could not feel at ease at all. At that moment, a thug nearby pointed toward them, and another commented on Lilith's attractive figure. One more thug expressed that he liked Lilith, calling her his type, while another mocked Weiss, saying he was cocky for bringing along a beauty. Weiss's face stiffened as Lilith gave them a death stare. Weiss walked away while thinking that they had better watch how they spoke, since Milk would literally kill them if provoked. Milk remained calm, but Weiss reminded himself that League Belt Town was considered the worst town, a den of thugs. Regardless of Milk's presence, Weiss resolved that he absolutely had to protect Lilith at all costs. Lilith muttered that the men were annoying, which Weiss overheard. Surprised, Weiss turned toward her. Milk told Lilith to ignore them, saying they were not worth their time. Lilith smiled and repeated the same, but Weiss thought that at that moment it felt as though Lilith was radiating an incredible killing intent. He wondered if it was just his imagination. They arrived at a house that was revealed to be the Adventurers Guild. Inside, some people were talking to the receptionist, while 3 thugs surrounded Weiss. One of them told Weiss to step outside. Weiss, still tense, recognized them as the Boudin brothers, his opponents. Milk explained to Weiss that the brothers had committed crimes such as and that their evil deeds were astonishing. They had been overlooked until then because of paying bribes, but the military police who accepted the bribes had already been arrested. She added that the only thing left was to take care of the 3 brothers and that they were the right opponents for a real battle, encouraging Weiss not to hold back against such extreme criminals. Weiss smiled and agreed, saying they should head back. Milk and Lilith dragged Weiss inside, and Milk, while holding him, reminded Weiss that although he had strong determination, he had no real combat experience. She told him that real combat was a path he would eventually have to take, so he might as well face it now. She warned that if he missed this opportunity, then, in the next real combat, it was not guaranteed that she would be there watching over him from behind. He might face his first real combat alone, and quite a few had died due to lack of experience. She reassured him that she was with him for now, and would help him if things got dangerous, telling him to face his first real combat with confidence. Weiss, with tears in his eyes, thought about what a reassuring person Milk was and called out to her gratefully. In the present, Weiss was being dragged outside by the 3 brothers, his face tense. He thought in frustration about where Milk had gone, realizing she had tricked him. He recalled her telling him to go into it with confidence, but she had disappeared along with Lilith. He regretted picking a fight with the brothers under the assumption she was backing him up. Suddenly, someone told him to come to the alley. Weiss panicked internally, wondering what he should do. He knew he could not back down now just because he was scared and had no choice but to brace himself. He decided that his goal would be to cut off one of their arms, as there was no need to kill them. However, he worried because it was 3 against 1, and he doubted if he could win even in a fair fight. Weiss thought that despite their appearance as punks, the brothers were quite skilled. If he got dragged into the alley, a fight would start whether he liked it or not, so he needed to come up with a plan beforehand. He remembered Milk's teaching that if he followed her lessons, he would be fine. Weiss continued following them while Milk and Lilith secretly watched from a table. Lilith remarked that deceiving her was cruel. Milk explained that if she did not say something like that, Weiss would not be motivated enough. She pointed out that training which assumed help would come was not really training. Drinking and resting her head on the table, she added that if things really got dangerous, she would probably step in. Lilith's face turned tense. From behind, some thugs approached, recognizing Lilith from earlier. Lilith gave them a side glance as they walked toward her, admiring her beauty. They surrounded her and introduced themselves as a band of thieves that ran the area. They explained that they were short on girls to hang out with that night and had been in a bind. Lilith noticed tied-up girls behind them, and her expression darkened. Suddenly, blood splattered, and in front of Weiss, one of the 3 brothers screamed as a hand flew through the air. Weiss had cut it off and now stood in a sword stance. Weiss remembered Milk's lesson that the most important thing in battle was to move first and catch the opponent off guard. The first strike that surprised the opponent surpassed any attack. Even a martial arts master could die if their neck was broken before they braced themselves, and even a magic master could die if hit before preparing a barrier. The remaining 2 brothers exchanged looks, grew angry, and tried to surround Weiss. Weiss reminded himself again to move before the opponent did. He kicked one in the face from behind, then dodged a sword by twisting his body midair. He thought about how he had always postponed making decisions, relying on his future self to handle them, but now he realized he had to make decisions within seconds. Weiss grabbed one of the attackers, threw him at the other, and used magic to strike. He charged forward at full speed, sword in hand, declaring internally that he was going to change from the lazy version of himself. He killed them all and, breathing heavily, thought about his success. He realized that if he had entered the alley, they would have surged with mana and increased their defensive strength. If all three had entered combat readiness at the same time, he would have had no chance of winning. His victory was only because he had moved before the enemy. He heard footsteps, followed by Milk's voice praising him with full points but then lowering it to 70. Milk explained that if it had been her, she would have cut off an arm inside the Adventurers Guild as a proactive approach. Lilith cheered Weiss with admiration, giving him 200 points. Weiss, overwhelmed, called out to Lilith and Milk, asking why they had suddenly disappeared. Milk laughed and apologized. Weiss sighed, exasperated. Then, noticing blood on Lilith's clothes, Weiss asked about it. Lilith quickly covered it, saying it was just his imagination. Behind her, the kidnapped girls looked terrified, and the bodies of the thieves were visible. News spread about the arrest of more than 20 members of the notorious band of thieves. A girl sitting in her backyard holding a newspaper commented that although there were no fatalities, the bandits had been beaten to the point where they could not speak. She noted that the notorious Boudin brothers had also been arrested with the cooperation of Weiss Vincent. She looked at his picture with a poker face and muttered his name. Later, Weiss sat at his house, confused, wondering what the mention of the band of thieves was about. Standing in front of him, Lilith reminded him that after the incident, a letter of thanks and a cash gift had arrived at the Vincent family. Then we see Weiss was standing beneath a waterfall. Yet the water did not touch his body at all. He maintained a poker face while thinking that it had been 1 year and 6 months since his training had begun. Milk was watching him from the side. Weiss reflected that it was day after day of intense training as usual, with the constant risk of running out of stamina and passing out from mana exhaustion. He closed his eyes for a moment, then suddenly opened them again, breaking a falling plank before it could hit him. He thought that those kinds of things no longer happened. With a smile, he acknowledged that he had also become able to detect the presence of enemies through walls. He could feel the mana flowing through his body and believed that he had grown considerably. That night, Weiss was eating while Zevis asked him if the magic training was going smoothly. Weiss replied that it was going well, though he admitted that he had a hard time with Milk Sensei's Spartan training. He demonstrated the 4 elements of magic: fire, water, wind, and earth, saying that he was required to train them all equally. Zevis was stunned, and Weiss muttered that Milk Sensei was such a demon, far worse than the Boudin brothers he had captured before. At that moment, Weiss noticed Milk staring at him from outside, and his face turned tense. Zevis explained that the reason Milk was making Weiss train so harshly was probably because Weiss's talent was out of the ordinary. He noted that even for an S-rank adventurer like Milk, she was only able to use 2 elements, but Weiss could use all 4, which was an exceptionally rare talent. Zevis thought to himself that if Weiss had remained lazy, this talent might never have blossomed. He recalled how surprised he had once been at Weiss's carelessness, yet he never expected Weiss to work diligently without giving up until reaching this level. Zevis admitted aloud that Weiss had truly become admirable. By then, Weiss had already left the table and was outside, kneeling and holding his head while begging Milk not to hit him. Lilith sat in front of him, telling Milk to stop breaking Weiss's nose with the wooden sword. Weiss cried out his apologies, while Milk accused him of practicing magic behind her back. He admitted to it tearfully, but then stopped in surprise when Milk demanded that he show her. Weiss stood holding 2 forms of magic in his hands. From behind, Lilith asked what they were. Milk explained that they were light and dark elements. On top of the usual 4 elements, Weiss was able to use special elements like light and dark as well. She demanded to know why he had kept this a secret. Weiss admitted with a tense face that he had wanted to show her only after it was complete, but it was still incomplete. Milk questioned what he meant, and Weiss clarified that he had not quite gotten the hang of it yet. However, he insisted that if it was now, he could do it. Weiss thought to himself about combining both light and dark magic, describing it as his original magic. He declared internally that now, with both Milk and Lilith watching, it was time to complete it to perfection. Using both elements together, he cast one spell, calling it the result of a 1.5 years' effort. Lilith was surprised, and Milk was stunned. Time passed, and it became morning, then night again. Outside Weiss's house, many people gathered, and inside, nobles could be seen mingling. Weiss let out a yawn while standing with Lilith, who asked if he had stayed up late. Weiss apologized, realizing a yawn was inappropriate in such a place. Lilith asked if it was fatigue from yesterday, but Weiss assured her that was already fine. He thought to himself that after that night, his original magic had been successfully completed. He recalled that the light element gave him healing magic called Healing Light, while the dark element gave him curse poison magic called Dark Haze. The combination of the two created a spell called Dark Heal. This magic automatically healed all allies within a certain range, while continuously dealing curse damage to any target recognized as an enemy. Although he had succeeded in completing this technique, the mana consumption was insane, and he had exhausted himself afterward. Weiss realized he still needed more training to increase his mana capacity. Lilith cheerfully offered to grab some strong booze to wake him up. Weiss tried to protest, but Lilith darted off, moving swiftly through the crowd. He thought that her agile movements resembled those of an assassin. He recalled hearing that there were hidden guards in the Vincent family in the backstory but dismissed the idea. Suddenly, a girl appeared behind him and called his name. Weiss turned and saw Cynthia, the daughter of Countess Violetta. His face grew tense as Cynthia stared at him. Weiss thought about her beautiful shimmering hair and her pretty red eyes, acknowledging that she was undeniably beautiful. He recognized her immediately as the game's main heroine, Cynthia Violetta. Cynthia greeted him after a long time, then mocked his expression, comparing it to someone who had crushed a goblin and turned it into muddy soup. Weiss froze in fear, thinking to himself that he was hated by every character in the game, but among them, Cynthia hated Weiss the most. She was the one responsible for filling his body with holes in the story. As a member of the Vincent family, he reluctantly showed his face at the gathering, never expecting to encounter Cynthia before enrollment. Weiss tried to calm himself, realizing that it was still before enrollment. He had not yet done anything to be hated by Cynthia, but then his eyes widened as he recalled the memory of the previous Weiss. He questioned in shock what he was seeing, and suddenly he remembered that Weiss had tried to assault Cynthia. Cynthia leaned closer with a dead stare, reminding him that she still had not forgotten what happened back then, when he had used his title to forcefully invite her to his room and tried to taint her with his filthy hands. She called him a trash noble and demanded to know how he could brazenly attend the party. Weiss's face broke out in heavy sweat as he thought to himself that this was the worst. He cursed the actions of the previous Weiss, realizing Cynthia already loathed him so much that he felt like he could die from it. With no other choice, Weiss resolved to sincerely apologize. He bowed deeply to Cynthia, admitting his fault, calling it an act unworthy of a noble, and expressing genuine regret. People around them began to gossip as Weiss remained bowing, thinking that he probably would not be forgiven at all. However, he reminded himself that Cynthia was not cruel enough to trap someone who was genuinely reflecting on their actions. Cynthia remarked in surprise that she never thought he would lower his head in front of others. Weiss remained silent, then raised his head and thought that perhaps she had calmed down, even if only a little. He felt grateful if this lowered the chance of his downfall somewhat. He told himself that this was all he could do for now, and that he should find the right moment to leave. Weiss admitted internally that, personally, he had wanted to get closer to Cynthia, whom he had liked in the original work, but he reminded himself that Cynthia and he were like light and darkness, destined never to cross paths. Just like a hero who got too close to the sun, he had no choice but to withdraw here. With closed eyes, Weiss suddenly felt something on his hand. Opening them, he saw that Cynthia was holding his hand. They looked at each other. Around them, people began removing tables as musicians arrived. From behind, Lilith, holding a glass, watched them. Cynthia formally invited Weiss to dance with her, still holding his hand. As the musicians began to play, both Lilith and Weiss reacted in shock. Weiss blushed deeply. The next morning, Weiss and Cynthia were sitting in Weiss's backyard. Cynthia remarked that the weather was lovely and that the little birds were chirping. Weiss acknowledged that the birds were indeed chirping. Both of them fell silent, and Cynthia sipped her tea. Weiss wondered why Cynthia was at his place. He recalled that the events leading to this moment had started that night when Cynthia had asked if he would like to dance. Weiss thought about how he had met the main heroine, Cynthia, by chance, and for some reason he had been invited for a formal dance. Cynthia noticed his puzzled expression and blushed slightly before admitting that she knew about the fact that he had changed. Weiss realized that Cynthia must have heard about his daily training in preparation for entering the academy through rumors among the nobles. While dancing, Cynthia stared at Weiss and mentioned that he had said he did not remember much about that day. Weiss remained tense in silence, thinking about the attempted assault incident, and with a guilty expression admitted that he did not know how to properly apologize for it. Cynthia suddenly pulled him and turned his body to the side, bringing his face close to hers. While blushing, she asked if he had also forgotten that he once said he liked her. Weiss blushed hard and responded in confusion. Cynthia averted her gaze and noted that the dance had ended. She then walked away, saying that she would see him again. Weiss thought that Cynthia had stolen his heart that day and left, but it had not been the end. Later, Weiss's father, Agito Vincent, appeared with 2 guards at his side. The following morning, Weiss shouted in shock after receiving a letter from his father, realizing it was about a dinner party with Cynthia at his place. He panicked, wondering what it meant, and exclaimed in disbelief when he learnt that she was already outside. The servants confirmed that they were preparing to welcome her. Lilith also saw the letter and noticed that another one was inside, which had brought them to the present moment. Weiss cursed his father internally, wondering what he was thinking. Although Weiss admitted he was honestly happy to be able to have tea with Cynthia, someone he liked, he thought that he could not afford to get close to her. Weiss knew that Cynthia was originally supposed to end up with the protagonist, Alan. He thought that if he got close to her, the events with Alan would not happen, and if the future were changed, he would not be able to act based on the scenario anymore. He reasoned that even winning against Alan in the test could change the future, but taking the main heroine away from Alan would completely ruin the entire scenario. He concluded that it would be bad if Cynthia disliked him, but it would be equally bad if she liked him too. He decided that he had to somehow maintain the perfect distance. Cynthia then asked Weiss if he remembered once saying he fell in love with her at first sight. Weiss looked at her tensely. Cynthia recalled that at the time, his confession had been sudden and arrogant, which had left her dissatisfied, but she added that if he were going to show such a sincere apology now, then even she would not be opposed to it. Weiss thought in panic that Cynthia, despite looking noble and dignified, had such a soft side, and it frightened him. The moment he thought it would be bad if she liked him, she began showing affection. Cynthia gazed at him lovingly, and Weiss thought that in the original story, Cynthia had fallen for the protagonist at an abnormal speed. He realized that while Cynthia was certainly soft-hearted, once she fell in love, she became incredibly devoted. Weiss decided he had to lower her affection for him somehow. As Weiss tried to laugh awkwardly, Cynthia blushed and commented that his quiet side was shy and cute. Weiss panicked, realizing his favorability was rising on its own. At that moment, Lilith appeared from behind and addressed Weiss, startling him. She offered him a refill of tea, which he accepted gratefully. While thinking that it was bad he had let out such a pathetic moan. He reasoned that perhaps it was a good thing because if Cynthia heard such a sound, her feelings would surely cool down. However, when Weiss glanced at her, he saw Cynthia blushing and muttering that Weiss was cute. Weiss concluded in dismay that Cynthia was hopeless and that he needed to do something quickly. Cynthia then asked Weiss if he had heard from his father about today's matter. Weiss responded in confusion, asking what matter she meant. Cynthia, blushing, revealed that it was about their engagement. She explained that the dinner party was meant to be their introduction, and although it had been arranged by their parents, after talking with Weiss that day, she had decided to agree to it. Weiss sighed while sipping his tea, reflecting on the engagement. Elsewhere, among the trees, Weiss's father was speaking with his guards. He remarked that Weiss was troublesome, though similar in appearance to him handsome, yet shy in such matters. He noted that Weiss had finally got the chance to dance with the famous Lady Cynthia. He revealed that he had taken immediate action to settle the engagement without hesitation, wearing a frightening smile as he commented that Weiss must be happy by now. One guard questioned whether Ejito was doing this with his son's approval. Ejito dismissed the concern, saying that as Weiss's father he could tell what his son wanted just by looking at his face. He then ordered the guards to stop complaining and help him with the tunnel opening, to which they agreed. Back at Weiss's residence, Weiss stood outside near a carriage with Lilith as Cynthia entered it, smiling at him. Weiss internally shouted at his father in frustration, wondering what he meant by arranging such an engagement. Weiss realized that what his father had arranged was not just a small tea party but his engagement to Cynthia. He reflected that while arranged marriages were common among nobles, this was not a political marriage but rather something his father had arranged solely to make him happy. Weiss admitted that in the original work, his father hardly appeared, never came home, and had seemed absent from his life. But now Weiss saw that his father was the epitome of an excessively indulgent parent. He finally understood one of the biggest reasons Weiss had turned into a villain. As Weiss turned, he saw Lilith in tears. She told him to be happy with Violetta-sama. Weiss was shocked, and Lilith ran away crying. Weiss panicked and wondered what was wrong with her. From the side, Milk appeared and announced that Weiss's training quota was to chase Lilith. Weiss looked at her tensely, and Milk, with a serious expression, explained that Lilith was crying because the man she had supported for a year and a half had suddenly been taken away by a young lady who appeared out of nowhere. Milk insisted that even though the engagement was not Weiss's decision, he could not ignore the fact that Lilith was saddened by it. She ordered Weiss to return to the mansion with Lilith, threatening death as punishment if he failed. Weiss, flustered, agreed and began chasing after Lilith, realizing that she had always been by his side and that, of course, she would be shocked by the engagement. While chasing her, Weiss acknowledged that he owed a big debt to Lilith. He thought that if Lilith had not supported him, he would have remained lazy. He admitted that the reason he had been able to give his best was because of Lilith. He shouted for her to wait, but Lilith disappeared from his sight, running even faster and begging him to leave her alone. Weiss was shocked that even though he was chasing with all his might, he could not catch up to her. In the forest, he continued shouting her name. Lilith crossed a river in 2 steps, and Weiss followed, begging her to listen to him once. Lilith told him it was fine, that she was only a maid, and that it could not be helped. Near the house, Weiss shouted that she was not just a maid but someone precious to him. Lilith leapt into a tree, and Weiss shouted from below that the engagement had been decided by his father, not him. He added that at the Noblesse Magic Academy, where he would enroll, only high-ranking nobles were allowed to have 1 servant assigned, and he planned to take Lilith with him because he trusted her the most. Lilith thought about being the one he trusted most and asked if that meant he was seeking her. Weiss, still panting, confirmed it. Lilith said that was why she was doing this. As they ran on the stairs, she slid down the rail and asked if Weiss would continue to chase after her forever. Weiss, nearly losing consciousness, shouted that he would. Lilith turned to him, closed her eyes, and stopped running, saying that if he insisted so much, she understood. She declared that from then on she would be Weiss's mistress, only to realize Weiss had already passed her and was falling from a cliff. Lilith cried out in panic as Weiss's eyes were closed. She leapt after him, caught him mid-air above a river, and hugged him. She told him to be at ease and promised to do her best, vowing never to tell anyone about their relationship. Weiss opened his eyes in confusion as Lilith closed hers and whispered that it was a secret love. Both of them fell into the river, and Weiss thought that he had become engaged to Cynthia while also becoming involved in an affair with Lilith. Somewhere else, a black-haired boy stood in front of a rock with a girl and an old man. The boy remarked that it was almost time for the entrance exam.
By the way, if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider liking and subscribing, pretty please?